When you think of JRPGs, what would you say are your favorites? What are the series that for you come to mind above all the others? The ones that come to mind for a lot of people are Persona or SMT, Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts. I just did a video on Kingdom Hearts, by the way, go check it out, etc. Now, for me, all of these are favorites of mine, but the series that for me stands above all these others is the Kiseki or Trail series. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, or excuse me, X, Jesus Christ, you'll probably know I'm a huge fan of the Kiseki series, but many of you may be unfamiliar with some of these more niche JRPG series and might be asking yourselves, what exactly is the Kiseki series and what about it makes it more special than any of the others you just listed? Well, that's what I'm here to discuss with you guys today. The beauty of the Kiseki series, why it's such an important game series in my life, and why you guys should give it a chance. I guess a segue into how the Trail series separates itself from other series, I need to talk about these other series first. Usually within certain JRPGs like Shin Megami Tensei, Persona, Final Fantasy, etc., outside of sequels, each game has its own self-contained story that can be played in any order, making it more accessible to a much broader audience. A good example of this is Persona 5, where outside of references to previous games, its story is not in any way influenced by the previous Persona games like Persona 3 and Persona 4. Outside of being within the same universe, so playing it is a lot easier to certain people. The Kiseki series differs from the standard convention of these types of JRPGs as the series uses each of its 12 games. Yes, I said 12, please hear me out, let me cook. The series uses its 12 games to tell an ongoing narrative that spans several arcs. The most comparable series to Kiseki in terms of it using its story to tell a prolonged narrative is Kingdom Hearts, but the thing that separates Kiseki from Kingdom Hearts as well as from any other JRPG series I've personally played is the nuance to which Kiseki tells its story, as well as the consistent world building that is done in each game. The series as of right now consists of 4 arcs: the Liberal arc, the Crossbell arc, the Erabonia arc, and the Calvert arc, spanning about 7 years in universe currently. The first 3 arcs span the first half of the series, while Calvert marks the beginning of the second half, and each place that the series is centered around during whatever arc you're playing through is extremely dense with lore, and whether or not that's your thing, I personally find that to be extremely interesting as someone who appreciates lore building, especially to the extent that the Trail series does it. Also, the music for this series kicks ass. Like, if you think Persona music is good, listen to this. Unisuga, take your shirt off! Anyway, while the music for this series is, once again, the best JRPG music I've ever heard in my life, Jindo, take your shirt off! From an outside perspective, the Trail series is definitely not the most accessible game series in the world, given not only how many games there are, but also that the series has several issues regarding the speed of its localizations, which is an entire video for a whole other time. But nevertheless, even though at first glance 12 games is an extremely daunting task for any person, especially if you don't have that much free time, once you can actually sit down and play the series for yourself, you end up with this sort of brain rot that leaves you hungering for more of the series. I mean, I know I had it after finishing Sky FC. If you know, you know. And whatever arc of the series you're playing through, there's always a different theme surrounding the story. With Sky, it's the idea of facing a cruel and unjust world with unrelenting positivity and optimism. With Crossbell, it's the idea of overcoming all odds, no matter how insurmountable the barriers may seem. With Cold Steel and Calvert, it's the idea that no one man can shoulder all of their burdens by themselves and that letting other people into your life is okay. Each of these themes are done with such nuance and can only have been communicated through the main characters of those arcs, which brings me to my next point. The series has a lot of characters, like a lot of them, like hundreds of them. So many in fact that I feel like it's genuinely impossible not to find that one character within the series that speaks to your own specific tastes. Even if those tastes tell you that Laura Arcade is a good character, but we're not going to get into that. And the main characters of each arc, like Estelle, Lloyd, Reen, C, and Van, are some of the best in the series. My personal favorite being Van Arkrai, closely followed by Lloyd Bannings. As I'm thinking about it, am I missing somebody? Nah. What Van goes through during the course of Kuro no Kiseki, no spoilers of course, really resonated with me, and Lloyd's character arc is literally just Simone's arc from Gurren Lagann. Like, Lloyd has the same Seiyu as Simone, Guy has the same Seiyu as Kamina. It's the exact same dynamic between the two, and the end of Azure has a scene just like this one. It's the coolest thing ever. Kondo, the creator of Trails, takes a lot of influence from not just other anime, but from various genres, demographics, tropes, and subtropes, such as the Henshin hero, mecha, etc., which helps the series' narrative stay fresh and engaging given that the gimmick switches up every arc. And with regards to the story as a whole, it's definitely not afraid to get dark. If you know about Stardorm 15, brother, may God have mercy on all of us. But yeah, the series has introduced anti-immigration groups, the mafia, cults. There's a lot of underground forces in the series to take away from the main antagonist of the series, the Society of Ouroboros. One thing I will say about Trails is that the series has a lot of terrible antagonists, like,
hell no, man, what the fuck, man?
But the thing about the society as a whole that makes them an interesting group of antagonists and separates them from the worst characters in the series is not only the broad spectrum of characters within it that have their own belief sets, morals, and motivations, but also how, due to the society's whole goal not being fully made clear to us yet, and those goals becoming completely broad as a result, the characters within the society are able to fit into whatever context of the story they need to fit into, giving the series a lot of leeway as to what characters they can explore at any given time. The best characters from the society and some of my favorites within the series are Arianrod, Leve, McBurn, and more recently Elroy Harwood in Kuro no Kiseki. None of them compared to Gileath Osborne though, in my Chancellor we trust. Now, with regards to the overall gameplay of the series, which is what some of you may be waiting to hear on, at the start of the series with like Sky, it's about your run-of-the-mill turn-based combat. You attack with your turn, you can cast magic, but even then, there's still a lot of subtle differences between it and something like a Persona, given how in Trails there are a sort of specific number of steps you can move at a time to attack your opponent, as well as special moves known as crafts and S-crafts. There's also the Orbment system, which requires you to place a specific thing known as a quartz in a slot, which can have several different effects, not just on your overall stats, but what magic you're able to perform at a given time as well. In later entries of the series, such as Trails to Azure, they introduced the concept of the Master Quartz, and from Cold Steel onwards, they introduced a lot more creative freedom and expression regarding build making. If you want to make a tank build, you can do that. If you want to have a balanced build, you can do that. If you want to have a craft points build in Hajimari no Kiseki, you can do that. If you want to have an evade build, you can do that. Each of these things allows you to break each of the games in many different ways, and they also introduce many different mechanics throughout the series. Now, one thing I will say is that Falcom is kind of weird about the mechanics they introduce in every game. I mean, like in Trails to Azure, they introduced the burst system. Then they took it out in Cold Steel 1, then reintroduced it in Cold Steel 2, just with a different name, then introduced Brave Orders and the breaking mechanic in Cold Steel 3, then nerfed certain Brave Orders in Cold Steel 4, which then nerfed breaking, you wanna break through, you were gone too soon, then said just screw it with Hajimari, or Trails into Reverie, god I hate that name. When it comes to Falcom, sometimes they don't really be knowing what they want at any given time, but I will say that most of the games are fun, even when they take out mechanics for no reason. It's probably some of my favorite JRPG combat as a whole, especially in Hajimari, or Trails into Reverie. God, I really hate that name, by the way. Given the variety of what Falcom actually allows you to do in these games, as well as how in Kuro no Kiseki they decided to do something even more different by introducing action-based combat on top of the already pre-existing turn-based combat of the series, and that action-based combat is tied into this turn-based combat really well, which was very surprising because it's not something I personally expected to be tied in as well as it actually was. Now, I won't sit here and say every single game in the series is a certified banger, because some games like Sky FC are mainly just really campy with not that much plot progression actually happening in terms of the overall series. But that game definitely gets a pass, at least for me, given how it was the start of the series in the first place, even though there are a good couple of sections that just weren't interesting. like at all. And Cold Steel 1 was way too long for a game where the brunt of its story happens at the end of it. And in that regard, Cold Steel 2 was much better than Cold Steel 1, but wasn't really moving me as much at times outside of really the intermission and the finale. If you know, you know. Outside of those three, I pretty much love every single game in the series, with my three favorites, Hajimari, or Trails into Reverie. God, I really hate that name. Azure and Kuro no Kiseki being some of my favorite games of all time, with Trails to Azure taking so many risks over the course of its story, but all of those risks really created an experience where I really didn't know what to expect at any given time. Reverie, with its addition of the route system and how the game marked the end of the first half of the series and set up Kuro perfectly, having what I consider to not only be the best gameplay loop in the series, but also the best story. That's debatable, but for me, it's just how the game sort of ends off everything perfectly within the first half and ends off so many character arcs and dynamics beautifully. And Kuro not only marks the start of the second half of the series, but it's also the best opening game to an arc in this series at all, and genuinely felt like an entire arc by itself because of how dense the game was story-wise and had that perfect blend of camp and story progression. This isn't even really mentioning fan favorites within the community like Sky Second Chapter or Sky the Third, etc. No matter which way you slice it, Falcom made a series where many of the games have potential to be a favorite of yours, and the best games in the Trail series are some of the best JRPGs I've personally ever played. I think the fact that the Trail series has been going on for as long as it has, and yet despite that, Falcom and Kondo have no intentions of really slowing down the production of the series, speaks volumes to the level of commitment that it takes to tell an overarching story like Kiseki does, and is one of the things that makes it my favorite JRPG series. It's the fact that the series has been going on for as long as it has, and despite some games in the series not really being for me, for the most part, I've enjoyed almost every single game that I've played within it, as each game is either building upon the world at large or is more character focused. The special support section from the Crossbell arc and the Arkwright Solutions office are two of my favorite casts ever, and it's largely in part of them not only satisfying troops that I more heavily prefer in storytelling and character building, but also that these characters just feel like they belong together, and that vibe can be hard to capture at times within other series and can come across as forced. The Kiseki series is the only JRPG series that I've personally ever seen construct its story in the manner that it has and still be engaging regardless. Whether 12 games is a lot of games to play at once or otherwise, this series deserves a chance from any person, as it not only has some of my favorite characters ever, but moves the needle for me in ways that other games are just not capable of doing. I love the Kiseki series, and I hope that all of you find a reason to love it just like me. Thank you all for watching.